Morning to everyone. I'm actually not on my way to the US, but I have to go back to the Philippines in a few hours to give a briefing to our secretary in terms of our participation in the WTO Ministerial Conference in Buenos Aires, and then from there go to the US tonight. As you may well know, one of the major highlights of this for the Philippine case of the ASEAN Summit a few weeks ago has been the announcement between President Trump and President Rodrigo Duterte of a opening of discussions for a bilateral FTA between the Philippines and the US. So this is the reason I had to urgently go to the US tonight. Well, good morning to everyone, in particular to Chief Excellency, to the Chief Executive, Madam Carrie Lam. And also thanks to Asia House, Michael Lawrence, Chief Executive, and Lord Green, the Chairman of Asia House. To friends and colleagues from ASEAN, in particular, Dr. Lim Hong Hin, and my very good friend, Vice Minister Tran Quoc Can from Vietnam, and Minister Bambam from Indonesia. Also, special welcome also to former Secretary of Finance for the Philippines, Cesar Purisima. Before I start quickly to give you a quick rundown of the achievements of ASEAN in its 50th anniversary, let me just give you a Philippine perspective of our ASEAN hosting. You can actually read all of the achievements, 10 out of 11 of our economic priority deliverables having been substantially delivered. Actually, it's 8 out of 11 fully completed, with 2 more were technically completed because we still have the remainder of the year, and 1 which was still a work in progress. Well, our basic philosophy in any international event such as ASEAN or APEC, well, it will just like be a fiesta, a series of happy gatherings among high-profile individuals, if there is no link between what you do domestically and what you are pushing for in terms of your hosting agenda. It's actually an opportunity for the Philippines to move forward in our international agenda. So that's the very significance of our ASEAN hosting. A few weeks ago saw the convergence of leaders and senior officials from countries and economies that represent about 90% of Philippine exports. They converged in Manila during the ASEAN Summit. In addition to formal meetings, there were bilateral meetings. So a day, for example, of President Duterte would have meant 15 to 19 meetings starting at 7:30 and ending way past midnight. For the domestic situation, the Philippines is a country that is one of the fastest growing in ASEAN, in fact, in the whole of Asia. Third quarter growth rate, GDP growth rate was just recently announced at 6.9%. Our manufacturing has grown at 9.4%. But the paradox is that we have been asking this question: how can a country that is the fastest growing in this region, fastest growing region in the world, also suffer from one of the worst poverty? We cannot rely on expecting that growth will trickle down to the marginalized. And in this case, marginalized is a big 1/4 of our population. In other countries, when we discuss this in WTO, marginalization is in the context of some other status, but in the Philippines, it's really in the context of poverty. There are people who are marginalized in the first place because they could not participate regardless of age, regardless of gender. So instead of relying just on trickle down, we cannot tell poor people, just wait because pretty soon development, you will also benefit from development. Those who are marginalized should already be able to participate in growth. Rather than expecting to be beneficiaries of growth, they should already become agents of growth. Thus, we have embarked on an advocacy at the domestic level of inclusive business. One major factor also to consider is that in the Philippines, Most of our establishments are micro, small, and medium enterprises, or what we call MISMIS. Maybe about 96% of establishments would belong to this category of MISMIS, with about 92 belonging to micro and small. And I guess that is true also for most of ASEAN and most of Asia. That's why participation of MISMIS in global trade is important. I remember Secretary Greg Domingo, our former Trade Secretary, during the last day of the APEC ministerial meeting in Beijing way back in 2014, while we were introducing what would be our hosting priority for APEC in 2015. And while everyone was discussing about FTA-AP, he said that in the Philippines, because people have not been able to participate in trade, there is strong opposition for FTAs. That's why he said that during our hosting year in 2015 then, we will place MISMIS at front and center of our APEC hosting. And Secretary Purisima subsequently also pushed for inclusive financial integration during our hosting year. And the MISMIS agenda has since been carried by Peru and then by Vietnam excellently during the last APEC meetings. Our president, when he attended the APEC summit in Da Nang, talked about inclusive globalization. Our push for inclusive business domestically was elevated in APEC as inclusive globalization by our president, and during our ASEAN hosting as inclusive regional integration. Yes, globalization has unleashed competition, leading to tremendous advancement in efficiencies, unlocking tremendous growth. But competition also leads to winners and losers, which is why there is a need to complement competition with cooperation and collaboration. We are not pushing for help, nor are we seeking assistance. In fact, the mantra in the Philippines now is trade, not aid. Just about maybe 4 weeks ago, when I was about to present and get for cabinet approval of a technical or development assistance project from a key partner of the Philippines that amounts to about $80 million. I won't say which currency exactly. You might guess the donor country. But just as I was about to, needless to say, it's one of the biggest technical assistance that we would have received. But I was asked by the cabinet secretaries, are they already allowing our bananas entry into their market? And I said, no, sir. Then we won't hear your presentation. Don't proceed with your presentation. Tell them, we want trade, not aid. So we are not pushing for help. We are not seeking assistance. Rather, we are pushing for commercial market access. We are pushing for fair rules, and we are pushing for partnerships. Thus, in our hosting, we push for a recognition at the highest level among leaders for inclusive business. And we complemented this with projects that promote the partnership between MSMEs or MISMEs and multinational enterprises. First. And second, knowing that cumbersome trade rules remain the biggest stumbling block for MISMEs to be able to trade, we push for self-certification, and we hope that this could be technically completed by the end of the year. We also push for logistics connectivity between certain members of ASEAN, which are really isolated from the mainland. I'm speaking about Philippines and Indonesia because of our archipelagic setup. So there was a maiden voyage of the roll-on-roll of vessels between Davao and Bitung. And then we also push for a work plan on e-commerce as a platform for MSME integration into trade by using its potential for efficient production networks and marketing efficiency. So those are just the perspective from the Philippines when we hosted the ASEAN. But just to officially report on the result, I'll skip some of the official report already. Okay. So our main goal as chair of the ASEAN Economic Ministers in the past year has been to ensure that those at the bottom of the pyramid can participate in trade, particularly the development of micro, small, and medium enterprises. We are committed in having ASEAN's economic growth become more inclusive. We have been advocating this view in other fora, including the recent APEC summit in Da Nang, Vietnam, wherein we called on discarding the old view that while trade creates tremendous wealth, it also generates winners and losers. While competition has yielded efficiency gains in trade, we need complementation, cooperation, and collaboration to develop an inclusive globalization model where everyone emerges as winners. The Philippines ASEAN chairmanship this year is a remarkable success achieved through the concerted efforts of the 10 member states and continuous open dialogue and cooperation with external partners. 2017's chairmanship is guided by the banner theme of Partnering for Change, Engaging the World, under which there were 6 thematic priorities. First, a people-oriented and people-centered ASEAN. Second, peace and stability in the region. Third, maritime security and cooperation. Fourth, inclusive innovation-led growth. Fifth, ASEAN's resiliency. And sixth, ASEAN, a model of regionalism, a global player. So let me focus on the fourth one, inclusive innovation-led growth. Under the ASEAN Economic Community, or AEC, the Philippines focus and push for initiatives that lead to the promotion of an inclusive and innovative region. So under this general theme are 3 strategic measures. First one, increasing trade and investment. Second, integrating micro, small, and medium enterprises in global value chains. And third, developing an innovation-driven economy. So one overall banner theme of Partnering for Change, Engaging the World, under which there was a priority theme on inclusive innovation-led growth. And under that, there were 3 strategic measures, as I mentioned. So under those 3 strategic measures, there were 11 priority deliverables. So out of the 11, 8 were fully achieved, 2 were technically achieved, and 1 is a work in progress. So those which were fully achieved include the following: the focus and strategic action agenda on investments. This essentially is the linking between ASEAN MISMIS and ASEAN MNEs. So there was a statement, but you know, in ASEAN negotiations or in ASEAN events, there are many statements left and right. That's why for us, we said, okay, let's not just stop with a statement from the ministers or a recognition of the importance of this particular topic from among our leaders. Let us, in parallel to this, let us complement this with an actual project, which is why in that actual project that happened in October 19 in Manila, there were about 90 companies from ASEAN that essentially is a business matching between MISMIS and MNEs. Then I mentioned already the ASEAN RORO, so that's the second deliverable. Then we also adopted the ASEAN Seamless Trade Facilitation Indicators to assist ASEAN in its effort to design and implement trade facilitation policies, regulations, and procedures. Essentially, with this indicator, we are targeting to reduce transaction cost in trade by 10% by 2020. And then we have the ASEAN Inclusive Business Framework. And then we had the ASEAN Work Program on Electronic Commerce. And then we also had a country visit of the Philippines as part of a monitoring system for the ASEAN. We're trying to introduce this similar to what they have in APEC. And then we have the action agenda for mainstreaming women's economic empowerment in ASEAN, and then an ASEAN declaration on innovation. So those were the 8 fully delivered priorities. The two technically completed refer to the region-wide self-certification scheme, which is targeted to be fully implemented by 2018. So hopefully we could complete this scheme by the end of this year and then fully implement it by 2018. There's another country that is not yet on board fully on the self-certification scheme. So it may happen that it will be on a pathfinder basis. And then the second is the substantial conclusion of the ASEAN Trade in Services Agreement. So those are the two agreements that we see would be fully completed by the end of this year. And then, of course, what remains as a work in progress is the RCEP. However, the level of engagement on RCEP has been unprecedented during our hosting year. In 2017, we had, I think, 4 trade negotiating committee level. So meaning these are the very senior technical level meetings, the lead negotiators level. And we had 3 ministerial level meetings that happened, plus the very first RCEP summit, so meaning the leaders themselves. And I believe if you read the statement of the leaders about the RCEP, you could detect the certain level of frustration about the progress within which the RCEP is being negotiated. And as a result, and also because within the context of what has been happening globally, they have tasked ministers and officials to substantially conclude the RCEP by 2018, so during Singapore's hosting. So I think that is a major achievement. And also one major achievement is that the ASEAN ministers have already put forward a proposed landing zone. So for the first time, the ASEAN ministers have gotten together and in a consensus, we have already proposed a way forward for the RCEP. We hope that this would make Singapore's hosting a bit easier when it comes to the RCEP negotiations. Now, on top of these 11 priority measures, the Philippines was also able to shepherd the resolution of long-standing issues through its chairmanship of high-level economic meetings, ministerial meetings, and also with the collaboration of everyone in ASEAN. I refer specifically to the ASEAN-Hong Kong-China Free Trade Agreement and the ASEAN-Hong Kong Investment Agreement, which was signed by the trade ministers of ASEAN and Hong Kong last November 12. And in addition to that, issues related to the finalization of the protocol to amend the ASEAN-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement to incorporate the chapters on trade in services, investment, and movement of natural persons. So the main stumbling blocks towards the finalization of this protocol has already been resolved. So actually, Dr. Lim, I think they will be having a legal scrubbing session ready this December or towards the end of this month, to December. So those are very critical for us. First one is the ASEAN-Hong Kong FTA, and the second one would be the ASEAN-Japan Comprehensive Economic Partnership Agreement. We're able to move on this to find the conclusion on these issues during our hosting year. Now, in addition to these two long-standing issues, we have also opened up other opportunities for ASEAN. And I refer specifically to our engagement with Canada. So ASEAN embarked on a joint feasibility study with Canada and have agreed on the conduct of exploratory discussions to further assess the merits of a possible FTA. So actually, the more adjectives, the more terms that you include in a sentence, it means that the longer time it will take. And then ASEAN and EU commenced discussions on the possibility of resuming the negotiations for a region-to-region FTA, which has been on hiatus since 2009. And then an FTA with Russia is being explored as a region-to-region FTA between ASEAN and the Eurasian Economic Union, with information sharing and confidence building activities to be undertaken as stepping stones to a more formal FTA talk. So again, many terms that enter into that sentence. So in summary, what we have done during our hosting year in ASEAN was to push for our advocacy in inclusive business at the domestic level, elevate it towards inclusive regional integration at the ASEAN level, and also pushing it as inclusive globalization in Vietnam during APEC. Inclusive globalization and regional integration, these are not apologies or these are not efforts to reform globalization. Rather, for me, we see, for us in the Philippines, we see this as the only logical alternative to drive globalization, to deepen its roots, widen its coverage, and in the process, accelerate globalization. This is the only alternative that we see for us to counter the growing protectionism, the strive towards inclusive globalization. So thank you.